Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hashing Out the Law. I'm very excited. On this episode, my guest is Solomon Schmidt. If you guys don't know who Solomon Schmidt is, he is the creator of History Bites. He started it when I believe he was 12 years old, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but like myself, he's a fan of history, so I'm very excited to have him on to talk about all his work and specifically his latest legacy, or I'm sorry, Legal Gladiator. It's about Solomon wrote it about uh, Dershowitz, Alan Dershowitz, who everybody knows. But I'm not gonna uh, bore you guys with me talking. Solomon, how are you?
Good. How are you, Arash? I don't think it was boring.
Thank you, Solomon. For those of you, for those of the listeners, the viewers or the listeners who are not familiar with you, could you tell us a little bit about your background, please?
Yes, please. Sure. It's always easy to talk about yourself, right? So, just a little background on me is that I was telling you earlier, Arash, I'm born and raised near Buffalo, New York. I have a father, Mike, who is a self-made businessman who lived the American dream story. He grew up low income and through hard work and savvy business brain, has achieved some amount of success in real estate. And that's the only reason I'm able to live the life I do, writing books, because, he's supported me with not just financially, but with great encouragement and constant companionship and friendship. And no, he didn't tell me to say this. And no, I mean, I'm sure he might listen, but and the other key part of my growing up, besides my siblings, whom I'm all friendly with, thankfully, is my mother, Lisa. I was raised by a lady who was a public school teacher for 10 years and homeschooled myself and my siblings. I was homeschooled from fifth to graduation, private schooled at a Christian school before that. And my mother was constantly giving me books to read. And I loved history, loved stories from the past, not for any political reasons. I loved Ronald Reagan. I was fascinated by the sinking of the Titanic, the building of the Statue of Liberty, biographies of great people throughout history. And when I was around 11, I was trying to decide what I could pour my time and energy into because sports wasn't really my passion. And I would get my work done uh, very quickly and have and wanted to pour my energies into some project. And I went around from a political board game to different projects. And my dad asked me, "What are you most passionate about, Solomon?" I said, "U.S. history." And he said, "Well, what if you wrote a book for kids your age about history?" And that became my first book, U.S. History Bites, which takes 30 of some of the most important events from American history and breaks them down into these bite-sized sections with like 3 to 4 pages each chapter, pictures, fun facts, review questions, a bobblehead of my face, little graphics and images to hopefully make it accessible to kids. And I wrote several books in the History Bites series covering U.S. history, the presidents, great adventures from world history, major wars from world history, famous and influential people, the life and works of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who I'm very passionate about. And then, this may sound like quite a random switch, but after I finished my eighth History Bites book in 2021, I was looking for a new project. I came across the life story of Alan Dershowitz. Thought he would be a fascinating guy to interview on my History Bites YouTube channel. But the more I looked into his life, the more I realized his story would make a fascinating biography, and it would be quite a change up from the format of History Bites and the style of writing and the age primarily I was writing for. And so I began researching his life, picked up some of his books, and I started formulating questions for people who knew him. I reached out to his professor who is still living, who taught him at Yale, Guido Calabresi. I reached out to a few other folks, including this guy named Harvey Silverglate, who's a civil liberties lawyer out in Boston, and a really great person I've come to learn. And it turns out he's one of Dershowitz's closest friends for 60 years. He's Dershowitz's only, pretty much, only Democratic friend who stuck with Dershowitz through the Trump years, agreed with Dershowitz's representation of Donald Trump. And so I hit the jackpot unknowingly when I emailed Harvey and said, I'm working on a project on a biography of Alan Dershowitz. I have some questions I'd like to run by you. He took an interest in my work. And a few months after that, I asked Harvey about the possibility of arranging an interview with Dershowitz for my YouTube channel. And once I reached out to Dershowitz through Harvey, he came on my channel. At the end of our interview, I pitched him what I was thinking for his biography, and he was very enthusiastic about it. We met in person a short time later. I spent about an hour giving him my plan for the book, and telling him that I thought a publisher would be interested in it. It turns out it ended up being rejected by about 60 publishers, a majority, as I understand it, a majority of whom rejected it because of Dershowitz's affiliation with Donald Trump. Wouldn't even look at it. I don't know what your listeners think of Donald Trump, but that is what I faced with the book. And the reason a biography was never written about Dershowitz, Arish, is he told me this story after a couple years of me doing interviews with him and meeting him in New York City, Miami, Martha's Vineyard, Israel. I finally got around to asking him this question, which had been on my mind for a long time. He was driving, and I said, I was driving with him, and I said, Alan, why didn't anyone ever write a biography of you? And he said, someone started to here on Martha's Vineyard back in 2018, and they stopped when I represented Donald Trump. So, not to be snide, but that guy's loss, and
Your
my
win.
and
Yeah.
and 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 I hope it's also the gain of whoever reads and enjoys Legal Gladiator, because I was just trying to write what I hoped would turn out to be a good story, because you have this man who's lived this incredibly fascinating life, and I knew that if I could write it in a way where my writing style, I could get myself and my opinions and fancy vocabulary out of the way and just tell his story as dramatically and understandably as possible. I know that his story is compelling. It's compelling to me, and I hope it will be to readers.
So I have a copy of the book in my hand for the viewers, Legal Gladiator. You mentioned it yourself. This book is not about a political stance or a political statement. This is about a life of a lawyer who is also a well-recognized national figure, and it just talks about um, from childhood to today and how what he's gone through and how he's achieved what he's achieved in his life. So, as a historian, I'm sure that you didn't include any personal politics in it, and those people who are hesitant about reading it are making a mistake. They should read it. You should know about everybody, even people you don't agree with. Um, I have a question for you. I'm going to go off topic a little bit. I know we're talking about Dershowitz. We know you like Tolkien. We know you like C.S. Lewis. You mentioned you're a U.S. history buff. Who is your favorite American historian?
Oh, no. Well, you know, there are folks living who I admire greatly. The primary one being actually a guy who's been a mentor figure to me. His name is Bill Potter. And Mr. Potter as well known as, say, David McCullough or Robert Caro, but he is a distinguished historian. He leads tours and has led tours around the world, from Italy to Switzerland to Scotland to Ireland to England and all over the United States. He owns about 10,000 books, and he's read, as far as I know, almost every single one of them. Now, we know Thomas Jefferson had a library of 6,000. Mr. Potter's almost doubles Thomas Jefferson's library. There's hardly a subject that you can hear Bill Potter speak about that he doesn't have some well thought out opinion or viewpoint or knowledge of. And he's a fabulous lecturer and just a pleasure to listen to and talk with. So my favorite living historian is Bill Potter. If I can take two with your question, if I can answer it, if I can give two answers, my favorite deceased historian is David McCullough, who listeners may know as the author of biographies on John Adams, Harry Truman, books on the Brooklyn Bridge. I haven't had the pleasure yet of reading all of McCullough's books, simply because I have such a long list of books that I have to get to, that I get to them very slowly. But I just finished up his biography of John Adams. It goes without saying, for people who have read it, that it is the gold standard of biographies. It is the great the great jewel, to use a Tolkien reference, the Arkenstone, the the greatest jewel in in the biographical genre, to which I humbly or respectfully try to achieve to, and I know I never will. But it's just a fabulous book. And what McCullough does, which goes to what you were mentioning earlier, Arish, about Dershowitz having a great human story, he gets you invested in the people. He makes the people come to life. It's not just a series of events that happen. It is human beings experiencing great trials, sorrows, exalt, exalting moments, hopes, ambitions, realizations, changing the world. That's what John Adams went through and accomplished. He did change the world. And McCullough brings to life the human side of that. He shows you he almost, you feel like you meet and get to know John Adams and his wife Abigail and his son Thomas and Charles and John Quincy and his daughter Nabby. I mean, I read this 600-page biography, and by the end, I mean, I thought I had, these were like friends I was saying goodbye to. I mean, it's an amazing spell that McCullough was able to cast over you. I'm trying desperately to learn how he did it, because I want to do it in my own work on a microcosm if I'm able to. So that's a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. I haven't read that one, but you're not the first person who's told me that's one of the best biographies, if not the best biography ever written about someone.
Mm.
So now that you've told me as well, I got to add it to my list.
Excellent. And there are other McCullough books I have yet to get to, and yeah, I really love biography, as you can probably tell. I'm also reading a biography right now of William Wilberforce, the member of Parliament in Great Britain, who almost single-handedly ended the slave trade and slavery throughout the British Empire. He's one of the most remarkable figures in the history of the world, one of the most important and influential men in of all time. And what's sad is very few people know about him. I only knew,
I didn't know about him. You're the one
well,
who just
you
taught
know,
me about him.
I only learned about him through a movie called Amazing Grace, and then there's also a book called Amazing Grace. But yeah, Arish, th I mean, in Wilberforce's lifetime, the slave trade and slavery existed throughout the British Empire. By the time Wilberforce died, because of his work, both institutions no longer existed. I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's unfathomable.
Now, having said that, you also give historical tours in Scotland and England, correct?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that springs from my love of Tolkien and Lewis. I fell in love with Tolkien's writings when I was 9 and I read The Hobbit. And I became very passionate about Lewis's apologetic works and then the Chronicles of Narnia after that. And I had an idea to run a tour through England themed around Tolkien and Lewis, going to Oxford where they lived and taught at Oxford University, going down to Bournemouth where Tolkien would spend his holidays by the sea writing the Silmarillion, one of his books, and so on. And that historian guy I mentioned earlier, who has 10,000 books and has basically read all of them, Bill Potter, when I was telling him about this idea I had, he said, well, if you're going to do that, you got to combine J.K. Rowling and go up to Scotland and see Edinburgh, where she wrote Harry Potter, and ride the Jacobite steam train, which became Hogwarts Express in the movies, which is 84 miles through the Scottish Highlands, and it's considered one of the most breathtaking train journeys in the world. And it, I had that idea in January of 2020. I put the whole thing together, and we all know what happened. I spent 3 years, not to cry the blues, get out your violins, everybody, but I spent 3 years postponing that, begging the hotels and restaurants to give me my deposit back. And finally, we went in July 2023. I had several guests, book spots on the tour. I rent a private coach. I organize everyone's hotels in 4 and 5 star accommodations, meals in wonderful restaurants. We see Stonehenge, Big Ben, Edinburgh Castle, the Scottish Highlands, in addition to basically the most iconic sites relating to Tolkien, Lewis, and Rowling. We went last summer and then went with another group in July. And both times, I'm so thankful to say, it was just an absolute delight. We've so far had all 5 star reviews on TripAdvisor, and it's just so much fun. Oh my goodness, it is just a blast. And again, I've had the great fortune, Arish, of having a dad who's financially supported me. He hasn't paid for the tour. It's not like that. I've broken even, but I'm grateful that I was in a position when I was 17 years old where I was able to think about doing this. And I'm not delusional. I know that doesn't just always happen. But I'm grateful that it was able to come to pass. It's a lot of work, not to brag, but as you can imagine, it's a lot of work because when people are paying you the amount of money they're paying you for a once in a lifetime experience, you better deliver a quality product as much as it depends on you. You better have your ducks in a row, your itinerary extremely well thought out, and that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun tour. Sounds like a fun tour. I actually am a big fan of Edinburgh, one of my favorite cities. The old mile. When you
That's right.
walk outside, you feel like you're in a taken back in time. And you're in a movie. And University of Glasgow. Did you go there?
I've passed through Glasgow, but why did you study there?
No, I went there to visit. So I went to University of Glasgow. You got to go see it. They say where that's the Harry Potter, the University of Glasgow. They say that's where she gets her inspiration for the school Harry Potter. I'm not a Harry Potter guy, so I don't know
Sure.
what this school is called.
Yep. It's very interesting. I'll have to, if I go back, which I'm planning another tour for July of 2026. And the other thing that's cool about Edinburgh is that J.K. Rowling comes to life when you're there because you can picture 30-year-old single mother Joanne Rowling pushing her baby in her stroller through the streets of Edinburgh on a cloudy day, running into a nearby cafe after her baby's fallen asleep to pen a few more pages of Harry Potter. And the reason she's so in my head right now is, or I'm thinking so much about her life right now, is I'm a little shameless self-promotion, which you gave me the permission to engage in. I'm working on a biography of her, which is actually already available for pre-order. It's called A Pen to Change the World. It's being published by Skyhorse Publishing next year. And as far as I know, it's the first complete biography of her, and it's a really fascinating experience going on this journey of following her story. And she's an endlessly interesting person, like Dershowitz.
Solomon, where can we pre-order that if we want to?
Yeah, it's at my website, solomonschmidt.com. And
Okay.
it will be, and it is available on all the usual places, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and Skyhorse Publishing's website, among many other places.
Now, can we get the legal Gladiator on your website as well?
Yes, and all the usual places as well.
Okay. We're gonna make sure that we put a link to your website in in both the video version and the audio version of this episode so the listeners and viewers can get it. Um,
Thank you.
my pleasure. I'm kind of in awe and in envy of you because you get to do all the things you do, and I'm a big history buff, and my goal is when I grow up to be a history professor one day. I got sidetracked when I was younger and became a lawyer. Um, but
Do you see an opportunity to pursue the history professor route anytime soon?
maybe later when my kids are a little bit more older and they don't need me to support them, maybe. Um,
Huh.
and I don't want
Be
to go
great.
into higher education right now. I don't think it's a very fun place to be.
I
But
see.
yeah.
Yeah, I hear you.
But what is your favorite project that you've done so far? I know you have other projects in the back of your mind that are coming up, but the ones that you have already finished, which one is your favorite or the one you enjoyed most doing?
It's a tie between my book Great Adventures History Bites, which overviews gives the story of 30 great adventures from world history, starting with Leif Erikson in 1000 AD and going up to Rob Hall, who was a New Zealand mountaineer who climbed the seven summits in 7 months and then perished on Mount Everest in a disaster in 1996 that was made into a book, Into Thin Air, and a movie called Everest. Fascinating story, sad story. But in between are just the most remarkable stories of human daring and courage. David Livingstone, the missionary going through Africa, Ferdinand Magellan circumnavigating the globe, the Burke and Wills expedition across Australia, Shackleton in Antarctica, Teddy Roosevelt in the River of Doubt in South America, Thomas Stevens riding a bicycle around the world in the late 1800s. I mean, these were just fun stories to write about. Some sad because people died, but fascinating. And so that, and I'm working on a series of YouTube videos based on that book, which I've been working on for the last couple of years, which are at my channel History Bites. And I've had the pleasure to do some traveling with my family and interviews and film, sometimes on location, based on those adventures, which has been a real honor and privilege. And so it's tied between that book and this Dershowitz project because I mean Dershowitz's life is just overwhelmingly fascinating. You've got when you think about his historic accomplishments, I mean, think about as a lawyer, he's done about 300 cases, including the Mike Tyson rape appeal, the O.J. Simpson trial, Woody Allen and Mia Farrow's divorce case, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker's fraud case in the late 80s, early 90s, Klaus von Bülow murder appeal in the 80s, Jeffrey Epstein's case, plea deal in 2008, President Trump's first impeachment trial, and not just the notorious cases, but also a lot of pro bono work on behalf of human rights activists in the former Soviet Union, Romania, China, and he actually went to some of those places in their some of their darkest days. And that side of his work is, I think, incredibly heroic. And I interviewed some of the people who spent time living under the Ceausescu regime in Romania. I interviewed Netan Sharansky, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison and spent 4 years in solitary confinement, whom Dershowitz and other lawyers helped to get out of imprisonment. And so that's just one aspect of Dershowitz's life's work. He was a professor at Harvard for 50 years. He was tenured at 27 in 1967, and over the next 5 decades taught 10,000 students, from Ted Cruz to Elena Kagan to Mike Pompeo to Natalie Portman, Jeffrey Toobin, Elliot Spitzer. I could go on. I mean, so many interesting and influential people, some of whom I interviewed for the book. Then you've got his career as a Zionist. Very controversially, like most of his life, he has been one of the most prominent advocates for Israel on the world stage, and he's known or advised every prime minister of Israel, basically, since Golda Meir to Bibi Netanyahu. He's known Netanyahu for 51 years. And as if all of this weren't impressive enough, he has written almost 60 books, which have sold 2 million copies in about a dozen languages. And he has spoken in person to about 2 million people in many countries and in many venues, from the Sydney Opera House to the French Parliament to the House of Lords, the Knesset, Carnegie Hall, Senate. And speaking of the Senate, Dershowitz doesn't just have this incredibly fascinating historic career. I mentioned earlier that he has this intriguing human story. I mean, a couple questions that sort of drove me on in my research one of them was, how does a kid who starts his life as a punk in Brooklyn, he had terrible grades in school, he was horribly behaved, he faked his own suicide, he would mimic the sound of air raid sirens because he knew it would terrorize his one teacher who had survived air raids in World War II. I mean, he, by his own admission, was a jerk of a teenager and a kid. And he was so bad that there were mothers in his neighborhood who told their daughters basically don't have anything to do with Avi. That was his nickname, AVI, Avi Dershowitz. One of them told her daughter that he's a boy with no future. How does that kid end up 60 odd years later on the floor of the Senate in an impeachment trial representing a president of the United States on the world stage at a historic moment? And as he's giving this speech and he's looking out at this sea of senators, the leaders of our nation, some of the faces he's looking out at are people who sat at his feet at Harvard Law School in decades past. How does that happen? And then another question that fascinated me was, why does a man who is, until recently, a member of the Democratic Party, from John F. Kennedy to Joe Biden, he's only voted Democratic so far, with one exception. He voted for Bill Weld, governor of Massachusetts, on the Republican ticket, who was his next door neighbor. And on top of that, Dershowitz, even though he's not a member of the Democratic Party anymore, as far as I know, still holds classic liberal positions: pro-separation of church and state, anti-death penalty, pro-choice, pro-environmental policies, pro-reasonable gun control, pro-LGBTQ rights, pro-exclusionary rule, and New Deal Democrat. I mean, why does this guy who holds these viewpoints and this worldview defend Donald Trump, especially knowing that he's going to be ostracized for it, and that his wife, whom he loves dearly, as far as I can tell, and has been married and has known for 40 years now, his children, brother, but most of his closest friends, colleagues, admirers, it's not too strong of a word to say, are vehemently opposed to him doing it, to going on the floor of the Senate to represent Trump and speaking publicly, as Dershowitz sees it, on behalf of Trump's civil and constitutional rights. Why does he do it? So those were fascinating questions to me, and ones that I hope were answered in Legal Gladiator.
So, from your answer, I take it that your first work you're very proud of because it was your first work, but the work that you enjoyed the most or you are very passionate about is your current work.
Yes. And I
Yeah.
suppose that's a good thing, right? We want to be most passionate about our latest
Well,
project.
it's a great thing. It's a great thing to be passionate about what you're doing because if you don't have the passion, then that means the work quality is not it's below standard. It's subpar. So I'm glad to see the passion. Um,
Huh.
I know that you have another biography you were talking about coming out. Besides that, is there anything in the future that you got coming out that we need to be looking forward to?
I appreciate you asking. At this point, no. Um, I do have ideas for future books, but at this point, I'm single-mindedly focused on completing this biography on J.K. Rowling.
Now, we're running short on time, but before we go, I got to ask you one question. What are your thoughts of about Stephen Ambrose?
You know, this may be to my shame. I'm familiar with Mr. Ambrose's name. I can't say I haven't read his books yet. Um, and I haven't listened to a great deal of what he's talked about. But like I said earlier, that is simply because I have such a long list of recommendations
Right.
and books I want to get to. Um, right now, I'm about to start Ron Chernow's biography of George Washington. There's just so many great historians. I want to get to Stephen Ambrose's books and others at some point. But what do you think of Stephen Ambrose?
I, the historians that you talked about, I haven't gone to. I've been stuck on Stephen Ambrose since college. Right now, I'm listening. I was going to say reading, but I'm listening to his book Crazy Horse and Custard, which talks about Crazy Horse and Custard and about the ultimate battle when they come together. You know, the Custard's last stand. Um, and I love his work. You know, he's done so many different work. Band of Brothers.
Yes,
I'm a
of
big
course.
I'm a big World War II buff and his stuff on World War II. He did Eisenhower's biography. So I'm stuck on Ambrose, and to me, he does what you were talking about. He makes you feel like you know the person that he's talking about. I feel like that right now. I'm living with Custard on the plane.
Isn't that fun?
I'm with Crazy Horse in his village where you know they're going on raids against you know the other tribes. So he does that to me. So when you do have a chance, you do Ambrose and I'll do the ones you talked about.
Absolutely. I know he's someone I need to give more attention to. Not that he needs my attention, but and Band of Brothers, I'm certainly familiar with. I've had a lot of recommendations to watch it, so I have to get to that at some
Yes,
point.
yes.
And I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Solomon. I know you got to go. I wish I could keep you all day and pick your brain, but thank you for being here, everybody. Solomon Schmidt, his latest work, Legal Gladiator: The Life of Alan Dershowitz. Be certain to check it out. You can get it on his website, solomonschmidt.com. We're going to include the link. Uh, Thank you. It was a pleasure. I wish you luck, and I'll be following your work closely.
It was a pleasure too, Arish. Wish we could chat longer, and it's great to meet you. I hope that you can continue to pursue your history passions.
Thank you. You as well.